This is part 2 of the video series on the production of wood laminated knife handles. In part 1 we described the production of the laminated boards to produce laminated knife handles. In this part 2 we're going to be showing how to make angled laminated boards to produce much more interesting patterns for your knife handles. For this second project, I selected and arranged 50 different wood strips. This will produce a laminated wood board that will be just a little over 2 inches thick. The wood strips used for this board will vary in thickness between 10,000 inch thick for the thinnest piece up to 100,000 inch thick for the thickest piece. And this will be glued together to produce a laminated board, much like this laminated board that was used to produce my Dizzy Bowl projects shown in some of my other YouTube videos. After this board has been glued up, it'll then be sliced at an angle. And by slicing this at an angle, you'll get some unique patterns in your knife handle, much like this. It's important that the wood strips are arranged with thicker pieces of wood sandwiched between thinner strips of wood of contrasting colors. The thicker boards sandwiched between the thinner wood strips produce this unique pattern. If the wood strips are all the same thickness, you'd have a much less interesting pattern. As shown in this sample, the wood strips are all the same thickness. So it's important that we have different thicknesses of wood between the different layers, and this gives us this unique pattern. And once this is made into a knife handle and you have additional contouring, you're going to get some more unique patterns to your knife handle. As was shown in part 1 of this video series, thin slices of various woods were sliced on the bandsaw using the Accu-Slice System to thicknesses varying between 10 thousandths and 100 thousandths inch thick. As was shown in the previous video, the 50 thin wood strips are glued together. I'm using the West epoxy system. I just mixed up 5 batches of this, and I'll start gluing up these 50 strips. The 45 to 60 minute setup time for the epoxy glue is needed to enable the glue up of all 50 wood strips in one glue up and clamping operation. The glued wood strips are aligned and then placed into the glue jig in a cradle of wax paper. The front angle iron is moved in against the wood strips, and then C-clamps can be applied to clamp the assembly. Due to the thickness of the wood I'm using, C-clamps are used to clamp the boards to remove the excess epoxy and ensure that the laminated wood boards will have parallel sides. Let that dry overnight. Now the boards are all glued up, I have to get rid of the excess glue and get the surfaces low. That's best done on a joiner planer. So after running that through the planer, this is what we have. Here's all my glued up boards after they've been run through the joiner planer and cleaned up and sanded. This is my 50 layer board, about 2 1/4 inches in diameter, 1.5 inches thick. So there's 50 layers in that board. And what I'll be doing, I'll be cutting these at an angle, and I determine the angle is going to be around 10 degrees to make my pieces. I have my laminated board with 50 layers all set up, and what I want to do next is cut an angle on here, and I want the angle to be 10 degrees, so it'll be a very narrow sloping angle for this board. So I set up my Accu-Sled on the Accu-Slice System, and I put 2 stops here, and the angle of that will be 10 degrees. And this is a test board I just cut on here. I put it on here, set it, and I cut my piece off, and that angle is exactly 10 degrees. So the jig's all set up. I'm ready to start cutting my boards. So this works by pushing my board up against those stops and then using these clamps to hold it in place. And as I slide it forward, I can advance my pieces to get the thickness of board I want. And I want boards probably about a ½ an inch thick. There's my angle on my board, and doing those laminated layers, that's what it's going to look like when it's cut. And there's our first board. I'll square it off there and there, so I got a piece around 7 inches long. So let me just keep cutting boards here. Out of that one board I got 5 sets of handles. And I match these up. I ran these, I sand up both sides and match them up to the same thickness and the same exact pattern. So I have five handles here that I can make. For my angle laminated boards, I'm going to make 2 sets of handles for these 2 knives. Okay, I began by matching up my scales so that they match up left to right, and the same as the angles, matching up, both going in the same direction. And then I put my blade on here, outlined my 2 patterns, and next I'll take this to the scroll saw and cut them out. I did the same thing here. Again, 2 sets of handles, matching up the patterns, laying out both handles, and also making sure that the boards, match the patterns and also the direction of the taper. So now we're ready to start cutting these out. I'll take these to my scroll saw and we'll start cutting them out. On the scroll saw, I'm using a 10 teeth per inch blade, and I'm cutting about 1/8 inch outside the line. And I noticed I cut these lines well outside my line. Can always sand or cut more wood off, but I can't add it back on. So I'll make sure I got plenty of meat there that I can sand down to the line when I eventually start fitting these to the handles. I'm ready to start drilling the holes for my 2 handle halves. And I kind of marked the tentative positions for the holes. And I did put some masking tape on the opposite side of the wood, so when I drill through it minimizes tear out of the wood. So let me drill the first hole. I think I'll drill this hole here first. The masking tape was used to fix the position of the drilled scale, so it did not move during the drilling of the hole for the second pin. In the future, I'll be using double-sided tape to hold the scales in place on the knife handle during the drilling operation. Okay, so we should be all set on that one now. Okay, for this next knife, it's a little more critical since I have this piece here. The handle goes right up against it, and I sand these two pieces to meet flush up against there, and at the same time making sure they're both at the exact same angle. So what I've done here is I put some double-sided tape on here, and I'll be putting the clamping it to there before I drill it, so I know exactly where it's going to drill, because I don't have much clearance here. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this covering on the double-sided tape. Make sure it's tight against the piece there, and wood all the way around. So let me go ahead and drill the holes for this. Okay, now I did the same thing on the other side. I put some double-sided tape here, and I'll clamp this handle in place again, making sure it's tight against this brass piece here, and also make sure there's clearance around all sides, so there's the wood on all sides of the knife handle. So let me go and put that on first. And again, I have masking tape on here so it doesn't tear out. Okay, so that should be ready to go now. So I think I'll round these corners off before I start, get that kind of smoothed out, and then we're ready to start gluing this up. Okay, I'm ready to start the glue up of both of these knives, one at a time. And again, I'm using the G-Flex epoxy. did roughen up my knife handle a little bit and make sure these are nice and clean. I did switch the spring clamps to clamp the knife handles to the blade. I thought it'd be more convenient, and I actually get a lot of clamps on a small piece. It's just less cumbersome than using the big C-clamps. I'll let that dry overnight. In a similar manner, I glued up the second blade. And again, let that dry overnight. After allowing to dry overnight, the spring clamps are removed, and I will next cut off the excess pin. Edge sander is a good sander to sand these faces flush and sand the brass pins flush, and that gives me a flat surface when I do the contouring to get that accurate. Okay, next I'll use this flat surface to keep this plate flat and sand this down just till it just touches the metal spline of the knife handle. I'm using a 2" by 72" variable speed belt sander for this operation. I'm running the belt at a slow speed so as not to burn the wood. I'm constantly checking my cut to make sure that I am just sanding the wood till it is just touching the metal knife handle. To sand the inside tight corners of the knife handle, I switched to the oscillating drum sander with a 1/2" sanding drum. I'm being very careful not to sand the knife blade itself. This is the finished sanding of the laminated wood scales to be flush with the metal tang of the knife blade. This is the sander I bought a few years ago when I was doing a bunch of intarsia projects, and these were good wheels for carving out those intarsia pieces. So now I'll be using this sander to do the contouring on the handles. I have them all nice and squared off against the handle, the metal handle of the blade itself. So now I'll be doing the contouring. This is the first knife handle after sanding and shaping on the small drum sander. The same techniques were used to sand and shape the second knife handle. I next did a little hand sanding on the knife handle using some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth out any ridges. And now I am finishing the sanding with a floppy disk sander using some 320 grit sandpaper. A final polishing of the knife handle is done on a buffing wheel using a fine abrasive to give me a smooth surface. This is the first knife handle after sanding and polishing, and this is the second knife handle after finishing. As a final step, both handles are sealed with bush oil. These are the two multi-layer laminated and angle cut wood knife handles produced for this video. The 10-degree angle cut of the laminated wood handles produced some unique patterns in the wood handles when sanded and contour shaped.